trashed his room before he left.
But according to Samar, the most important act for a recruit is to condemn those who are not aligned with the calling's ideology, especially those closest to him.
His parents.
Which brings me to this notebook. And this is Luke's handwriting.
A letter?
To his adoptive parent. The language is brutal,
All my relations.
but the letter is
Hello, everybody.
He was trying to do something.
He couldn't bring himself to finish. Jethro,
Miigwech Chi-miigwech.
here is
There we go.
undeniable.
Hello.
And what we're dealing with is
Excellent connection.
a child
Fantastic.
who, beneath it all,
We couldn't ask for anything better.
he loves his parents very much.
So, is this educational yet? There's nothing to learn now. There's only unlearning.
Did you write that?
Yes.
You want to finish it before I show it to him?
Who?
Your parents. What's
Who
wrong?
will save the river valley? That's my drinking water. This was once a sacred place now.
Show it to him.
Look at what we've got here.
Hey, you said you wanted to die. What would your parents think if they heard that? You broke their hearts.
I pretend there isn't any problem. Just do my job. And if I don't like the standard of living, go move to Russia.
Do anymore.
You talk to me.
Me and Pete went swimming last night. He's my friend from Boy Scouts. He's my fish from...
Will you
All the fish were floating upright. We got scared, we got out.
I didn't want to hurt them.
Mother says go play down where your father
What were you doing?
does his job. Don't do that.
Luke was in the building.
You know he's got to make a living
Went to the building near
or
the
move to Russia.
For introductions, he was afraid.
This is my world. Don't let it go away.
I went to see behind.
Is it a crime? Spending my time dreaming of yesterday. Meet me in the river valley. You can tell me stories about a time before pinstripe suits, tippers, crits, and Tories. My mother sang the songs her mother taught her, and we be swimming off in cuckoo water.
When you give into the sickness.
When she called us from the yard,
To his parents' house.
running home, it felt like God. Ah, this is my world. Who's gonna save the river valley? If not you, who? If not me, when? There's so much violence in the world. We're pretty shitty to each other, eh? That should stop. Have we learned our lesson yet?
I know nothing about any S-signs.
BGSI thought that you were a calling leader.
A few people should never rule over the many.
You ask about the United States.
That's a lose-lose
Questions.
for all of us.
When you plan a big
You know, take a look at the ant.
so many details discussed over many lines. It is impossible.
Do you think it does anything without the consent of the whole?
Be with me today.
You know? Like when it comes to it. But then there's choice. But it always kind of reverts back to the whole. And that's kind of what it means to be a whole person. Holy. Do we know what holiness means? To be whole? Probably not. Most of us. And that's okay. All of the planes have landed. The soldiers are in their beds. Smoke rises from their clothing, and sweet dreams through their hair. Truth-faced leaves a strange taste when joy and sadness meet. A country rain on a city street. This life is bittersweet. The boy with the bloated belly hears today's trucks arrive. He puts down his baby sister and makes his way outside. Truth-faced leaves a strange taste when joy and sadness meet. A country rain on a city street. This life is bittersweet. Everyone's a novelist, and everyone can sing, but no one talks when the TV's on. Sweet dreams fill their heads. Truth-faced leaves a strange taste when joy and sadness meet. A country rain on a city street. This life is bittersweet. When I was 3, my mother said to me, eat up your greens and say your grace. While on TV, they put a dog in space and left her there. You should have seen her face. Ooh. When I was 5, the dream was still alive, and Walter Cronkite said, one day we'll earn our daily bread, conducting things in outer space, but still on Earth I thrive, and you pretend I'm not alive, and I walk by with my substitute, while I fasten the oxygen valve on my spacesuit. And all the experts can agree on regarding your motives in the Cape Canaveral crash is that they know nothing. It puzzles me so. It puzzles me so. Puzzles me so. Puzzles me so.
Last we heard, he was rushed to the hospital. We're waiting on him. He's circling back to Cairo.
When I was 8, we shared a cloak rack. It was great. And I pretended I had so much on my plate. I had a speech to write about moonshot trajectories, and during phonics class, perfected my delivery. Now the band's playing Hail to the Chief while my capsule's out floating by some tropical reef,
Got confirmation.
and all the experts can agree on regarding your motives in the Cape Canaveral crash is that they know nothing. It puzzles me so, puzzles me so, it puzzles me so, it puzzles me so. Now I'm full grown and I have a spacecraft of my own, but there you sit, still upon your earthly throne. Hey darling, throw that space pup a bone. Don't touch that dial, don't hang up that phone. Man's playing hail to the chief.
When we're together.
Don't hang up that phone. Don't hang up that phone. Man's playing hail to the chief. Man's playing hail to the chief. Don't hang up that phone.
According to that test, my four major cities around the world now planning a coordinated international attack. And if they succeed, the results will be catastrophic. When? No idea.
I need you to stay on the saga. I need you to keep taking.
I have my limits. Pro bono only feels good for so long.
There's a pie here. Apple crumble pie.
Details are trickling in.
There's the last one
Hours
too.
in surgery. Doctors are optimistic. As far as Cairo, I did speak to Second. She Gibbs. I need you with me. I'm here. Reports to Second have confirmed. Agent Dornigan led a last-minute evacuation. He saved a lot of lives. He would have wanted you to know that. It's family. It's just his mother. She's been notified. She's been out of the country. Travel is complicated. There ain't anything. Yeah, actually there is. She won't be able to make it before the plane arrives from Cairo. But we'll be there for him.
Excuse me.
Funeral details. Attention. Forward. March.
We cannot always build the future for our youth. But we can build our youth for the future. FDR's words are never more urgent.
Gibbs, all right?
Yeah, I'm just seeing space spirits. Nothing unusual. I shouldn't have had that extra coffee. Good one, man. All right. Cool. Well, this here's yours.
We weren't expecting to until tomorrow. We would have waited.
I know.
Gibbs. CIA Officer Joanne T. Agent Morgan's mother. Officer T. We're sorry for your loss.
Ned would have appreciated the pomp and circumstance. My son is dead, and his killers are still out there. I'd say we've got some work to do.
Right on. To be continued.
Throw that space papa bone.
This spring,
Don't touch that dial. Don't hang up that phone.
He's out there. He's gonna do something to save the world.
Man's playing hail to the chief. Man's playing hail to the chief.
Must-see drama. This is not gonna save Max. I have this feeling like I'm trapped.
I need to find out what killed my sister.
And join the fight.
We're talking about the end of the world.
this spring, only on Showcase.
Canada's first mosquito-repellent clothing now protects against ticks. Proven protection with an invisible, odorless barrier. Wind River Tick and Mosquito Repellent Clothing. Shop exclusively at Marks or Marks.com. Got it.
Got it.
Quick! The quicker picker up. Bounty is quicker and one select size sheet of
Howdy.
more than their
Howdy.
Bounty, the quicker picker up.
So, I was banned from Facebook for 24 hours. For no reason. They said it was for hate speech.
Just click on an ancestry pin to uncover specific
It's interesting, don't you think?
add to your family story. Start your journey for free at ancestry.ca.
Anyways, you can view my videos for all that hate speech. I got about 300 and something videos. I don't think I've ever said a hateful thing. Test it. Try to find one.
New season premieres June 11th.
Try to find one. Is this like am Can people chat with me right now if they wanted to? There's no one listening, is there? Got one concurrent viewer. That's good. That's good. How do we get more? Anybody? How do we get more? 0 likes. That's fine. I think after a while you'll find that I'm a very agreeable individual. But you know when you get beat in the park and tortured by the police, then you
This
know.
program is available in described
But I still am.
Visually impaired.
Come to the door. Come to the door and talk to me. No? Okay. Until then, what are we gonna do? Let's sing. No. Let's listen to the futility of the egoic reaction. Eckhart Tolle's in the house, everybody. Live from Penticton, British Columbia, Canada. Room 240 at the Beaumont Motel.
My goodness!
Oh shit, that's loud.
Poor darlings. There's only one way to groom your balls. Introducing Manscaped Lawnmower 2.0.
Yeah, that's cool.
Featuring skin.
Manscaped.
So, we all know that some foods make us gain weight, and some foods are definitely healthier than...
The whole world is focused on China right now, but what if I told you there was a little known Chinese technology where the major Chinese player transacts over $1 billion per day? And what if I told you that this powerful new technology is finally emerging here in the West and it's already being embraced by the Silicon Valley elite? Right now, today, here in the Western world, this industry is valued around $7 billion, but by 2023, research reports indicate that this market is going to be worth a staggering 110.
Good morning, Tony.
We all know the world is in tremendous crisis and peril today. The problem is, the culture.
Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., and now Anthony Tenerzo Jr. Very nice. Whoa, watch it. I don't know where those pauses.
You switched off your cell phones, I hear. And what about your minds? Not as easy, because it's not just, well, it is a voice in the head, but over the years and centuries and millennia, it's more than just a voice. There's a kind of entity. It has turned into a kind of entity. And me. Not ultimately real, but seemingly real enough when you confuse who you are with the talking and reacting entity in the head. Energized, amplified by emotions in a vicious circle. The emotions are created by whatever the entity is thinking, and the energy of the emotion further amplifies the entity.
Around 7:30 a.m. I'll know more after the examination. Mr. Power, if you please, would you help me get this man upright?
Ego.
Strength.
Well, victim is Marine Captain David Landis, 30, single, stationed at Marine Base in Quantico, we called him. The gunnery sergeant Joseph Wilkes. He unsuccessfully engaged with the assailant. EMTs are with him now. We got a murder weapon.
And the strength of that varies from person to person. In some way, we could say that the entity is an aspect of karma. What is in the East is called karma. It's the patterns inside you, inherited patterns inside you, that you confuse with who you are. Consciousness identifies with the patterns.
Look, I don't want to profile or anything. The kid was definitely Middle Eastern. I'm not saying that's a bad thing.
And in some humans, it's a very heavy entity, extremely dramatic or angry or very heavy and sad, easily upset, always looking out for some perceived injury or slight, always ready to jump to its defense, even questioning somebody's viewpoint because you identify with the mind, which is ego. So any viewpoint is invested with a sense of self. The ego is in your viewpoint that you're expressing about this or that. So even somebody questioning your viewpoint can lead to extreme defensive measures or aggression, as you can witness everywhere, on television or in daily life.
I'm anything but calm.
A peaceful discussion with that entity is not really possible.
One is our victims, and the other one belongs to...
Because a peaceful discussion about something implies that there's some degree of disidentification from that mind-made entity. There is at least a little bit of space in you and the other person. Primarily in you. That's the main thing, is not to demand that there should be space in the other person, but to make sure that there's space in you when you're discussing something.
Without sacrificing results, try Olay Total Effects for a 7-in-1 solution. Its unique formula is packed with vitamin B3.
And you can see if the other person is already getting upset.
Contains more vitamin B3 than 50 cups of kale. Olay Total Effects gently renews.
You can see why immediately.
7 key areas of visibly healthy
Identification with
save time and money on your
a
skin
mental
routine.
position,
Olay Total Effects.
ego.
Brand power helping you
The
buy better.
entity feels threatened and is barking back at you.
It's not easy.
Some dogs do that also. But the same as in humans, even in vicious dogs, they are only vicious because of their past. Underneath the viciousness in every dog, there is a goodness. And underneath the madness of the egoic entity, there is also the truth of who you are or who that other human being is. So your task as you're confronted with these entities, and you are all the time, occasionally your own still takes over perhaps, one or two of you may still experience it occasionally.
Behold, Works Power Share. All your tools powered by the same battery.
The task is to be there as the observer or witness of your mind. Then you are no longer in the grip of an egoic entity. So ego then is the unobserved mind, complete lack of awareness. In other words, there is only mind. And that's the state of, one could call it, hypnotic state or dreamlike state, in which you dream up your life. And then things happen around you. Because in every every person's life, you come into this world here, and you're surrounded by a certain situation. Things happen to you. You react. The entity reacts without any awareness. It reacts according to its aggressive, defensive conditioning.
HR is going to put one in every single
So it's completely at the mercy of what happens around it. And it perpetuates its own state. So an event that for somebody who is relatively free of the ego, at least in that particular area of their lives, the same event happening to one person is relatively unimportant. Oh, Eckhart didn't reply to my email. To one person, that is, he must be very busy, or maybe he doesn't even read it, and that's just how it is. And the other person feels deeply offended. I wrote to him 3 times, nothing. Didn't even bother to reply to me. And that's the beginning of the story. And that proliferates into how dreadful a person he is. And then you find other things that you can focus on. And that's how the entity strengthens itself. It grows. It inflates itself by this reactivity. So a relatively insignificant thing is this entity, of course, personalizes everything that happens. It's to do with me. They're trying to do something to me. He's ignoring me. How dare he? And so
Captain Landis' examination has proved quite
it grows.
His killer stabbed him 7 times.
The next thing is the emails become angry and accusations or phone calls. I'll get you. That's how it grows. Next time you walk out of your house, I'll be behind you. That's how it can grow. These are more extreme forms, but not uncommon. So it doesn't matter to what extent it grows, but you can see the simple fact of somebody not replying becomes something dreadful that's happening to me and proliferates into a story. It can occupy a large section of your life. And another person said, oh, that's how it is. When the Power of Now first came out, some people suggested to me it would be a good idea to send a copy to Deepak Chopra. And I did. Because that maybe he'll read it, and it was published in 3,000 copies, the first edition, which had to be taken. I carried to bookstores in a plastic bag, and so I signed it to him, and nothing. As if it had disappeared into the hole. And now this is what happens when people send books to me, but now I know why. Because you can't even read them all. You can't possibly read them all, the manuscripts and the books. But luckily, that entity was no longer operating inside me, so there was no complaining that Deepak had not, there was no reply. Well, that's just how it is. He must be busy. Maybe he read it, didn't like it. Maybe he didn't read it. Who knows? The moment I interpret something, I'm projecting. So it's futile to interpret something. You have no clue why. It's just, that's how it is. It's the simple isness of fact. And of course the truth is, I'm sure he never even saw it, because he gets too many books. It's impossible.
Gibbs, I need to talk to you. I've come over the CIA's file on Cassim, and I think...
By the way, later when Power of Now was already doing very well, he did write an endorsement when it wasn't needed anymore, but it was... That was very nice. But if I had sent him angry emails, I still have not heard from you after 3 months of sending 10 emails. You still neglected to inform me whether, etc., etc. Then I don't think he would have written an endorsement. So your reaction determines also what happens next. So if your reaction is an egoic one, it's not simply the reaction to something that has happened in the present moment, it also determines how the events unfold from now on. So if the egoic reaction is aggressive, negative, demanding, complaining, whatever the ego does to strengthen itself, to feel stronger, then that creates an echo in the external world. It's like you're shouting a particular sound, you're shouting it out into the world, and then it echoes back. So what you're putting out then, as in your reaction, which comes to words and actions, then comes back at you. People react to your reaction because they are not perhaps totally enlightened, in which case they wouldn't react to your reactions. But they have their egos, so they react to your reaction. And you create a whole train of reactivity, and this is how the drama develops and grows. And it's all taken for absolutely real, and that's how it is. You don't realize, the entity doesn't realize, it's creating the whole story. And all it hears back is the echo of its own conditioning, coming back to you from the external, the outside world. And so, and of course that then serves as a very powerful confirmation that your initial interpretation of events was absolutely correct. So, because he says, you see, his original intention was to deceive me, to whatever, and then when I confronted him, he got angry because I was right, and so on. And if you've ever tried to argue with the egoic entity, with someone, you can see the futility of it. It is impossible. You cannot convince this egoic entity of its own illusory nature. You can't. You only strengthen it. Arguing with the ego is quite funny ultimately, but it's an absurd enterprise. On its own level, it will always win. And it will draw you.
9 months is perfect.
Well, the moment you start arguing with the ego, you're already trapped in your own mind patterns.
The short answer is, you need to heal your wounds.
So the karma then, this being an aspect of karma is what happens. Usually people say karma is what happens to you, but more importantly, karma is how you react to what happens, because that is what perpetuates the conditioning. And that creates what you experience as your life, and it creates how other people react to you. So how you experience interactions. Amazing. So often I observe the futility of egoic
That's a
reaction
good message to bring.
nothing,
You know,
to
point
reacting
right,
to
directly
nothingness
back to themselves
and blowing it up like a huge
power
soap bubble,
have,
Yeah.
but are
talking about it for days on end,
it's obvious.
until finally reality confirms
So
you were
what
right all
happens?
along.
That's all I can think of.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's quite a
You do
trap.
half, I'll do half.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
So you need to,
Way to round out the next.
Yeah, that would usually half of one of those.
the heavier
Yeah, 4 or 5 gets me there.
the egoic entity in you is, the more dense it is, because the density, we could call it that. I'm talking about ego. The emotional aspect of ego is a large part of the emotional aspect of ego is the pain body. The pain body really is the emotional aspect of the egoic entity. And the density of the ego in you varies from person to person. There is probably nobody listening to
Different
this
circumstance.
here or there.
All right, that sounds like
This
a
is
fun thing
the
to do. I'm gonna do that.
wormhole of the camera through which the words are reaching out, and there's somebody the other end. Hi. Not just somebody, far more people than sitting here. There's thousands of people at the but there's nobody, people sitting here or at the other end of the wormhole, whose ego is extraordinarily dense, or if they are, they won't stay here for very long. Or they would switch off the screen saying, this is awful. There's nothing that the ego likes less than to hear about itself.
Can I borrow your wrench quick for this? Or
So it is then not so likely that in you there is this great density of the ego and pain body, but you still encounter in your daily life, you will still encounter many humans who manifest extreme density of ego and pain body. And of course those people create suffering for themselves and others. That's their purpose in life. That's where they are at in their evolutionary journey. They are here as spiritual teachers.
Those hooks on the back.
They are creating suffering, which eventually will awaken them when they realize that the suffering they experience is self-created. But that could take a while before they realize that. In the meantime, they might attempt to create suffering for you at the same. It's because they go together. And so they become your teachers because they force you into more intense presence, or they draw you into the egoic unconsciousness.
It's almost too low now.
So when you're confronted with dense egos, there's one spiritual teacher in India called them ego Gs, G being a term of respect. So the ego Gs, there are still many around, and they're here to teach you more presence. Of course, they don't know that that's what they're doing, but within the totality, that's ultimately what their function is in the evolutionary journey of humanity.
Very nice.
What are you doing? It's all right, Cassie. I told him the truth. We need to talk to you about Landis. I swear, I did not hurt him. down on you. Catalana's got in the way. You don't seem surprised.
The thing my brother does surprises me. All my mother and
Welcome
father
everyone
wanted was
to
peace.
this special three-part video series on Conscious Manifestation 2020. In this series, Eckhart addresses how we approach conscious manifestation right now, right in the midst of the global pandemic, when so many people are feeling so much instability and economic insecurity. Here's Eckhart Tolle with part 1 on the first step of conscious manifestation.
So whenever you encounter adversity or loss or extreme limitation that suddenly comes into your life, some kind of disruption that comes into your life, that is a call to come more intensely into the present moment, first of all. So allow whatever form the adversity takes, whatever it is that you're experiencing right now, allow it to, one could almost say, force you into the present moment. If you're not in the present moment, you will be in a state of fear. So the first step for manifesting something better is to forget about manifestation and be completely concerned with the present moment only and give your fullest attention to the present moment. That includes not only whatever is happening around you at the present moment right now, your sense perceptions and so on. This is of course part of the present moment. It also concerns the thoughts that you're going through your mind at the present moment. So there's a huge difference between having thoughts go through your mind and being aware that certain thoughts are going through your mind at the present moment. This is something very important, easy to overlook. Thoughts go through your mind all the time. For most people, particularly people who have not awakened yet in any way, who are still unconscious, which means completely identified with a thinking mind. For those people, there's no awareness behind the thought. This is why we say they are unconscious. Without awareness, there's only the movement of thought, and the movement of thought reacts to whatever is happening around you, and the way in which the movement of thought reacts to whatever is happening around you depends on the way in which your mind has been conditioned by past experiences. So the conditioning of your mind determines how you react to things that are happening around you, how you interpret them, what kind of narrative you create around what is happening around you. You talk to yourself. That's the voice in the head, the thought processes. This talking to yourself becomes a narrative. Without awareness, you are completely identified with the stream of thinking that is reactive to whatever is happening around you. And if something is happening that is challenging, in other words, some kind of adversity, limitation, loss or disruption of your life, then the normal thing for most people is a very scary narrative that arises in your mind. The way in which you interpret what's happening is scary because you're not only looking at what's happening now, you're also extrapolating from there and saying, how is this going to affect me? What's going to happen tomorrow, next week? There's the future. You project yourself into the future where you see things are getting even worse than they are now. You see already how whatever is happening now, how it's going to affect your life, and you play out scenarios in your mind which are not pleasant, and you don't know what you're doing. You believe that what you're experiencing is the reality, but it's not the reality. What you're experiencing is what your mind has created. It is a narrative that your mind has created as a reaction to what's happening around you. So you're not experiencing reality. You're confusing what is happening in your mind with reality. So once an awareness comes in, the awareness, another word for it is presence. When awareness comes in, you suddenly become aware of the kind of thoughts that your mind is creating. And that is the beginning of awakening, spiritual awakening, the awakening of consciousness. That is to become aware of the way in which your mind functions and what it says. And this is why it's so important to become conscious of the present moment, because that is an intrinsic part of being present, is to become aware of what your mind is doing in this moment. And this is why I said the first step is to forget about wanting to manifest something different. We can go there later. The first step is become more intensely, more acutely aware of the present moment, because if you're not without that awareness, you are at the mercy of your mind, the conditioned mind, without even knowing it. You have become a victim of your mind. And so it is true to say that for many people, their worst enemy lives between their two ears, and they don't know it. So the most foundational step is coming into the present moment, which implies the arising of awareness or presence. And as that awareness arises, you become aware not only of your immediate surroundings, which is part of the present moment, but you also become aware of the thinking mind and what thoughts is your mind producing. And you look at are these thoughts reflecting truly a reflection of reality, or are they a fiction that my mind is creating, projecting itself into the future where things are usually seen as going to get worse? And then you experience the emotions. The emotion usually reflects mind activity. So if your mind is producing thoughts that are telling you that your situation is dangerous or critical, although in the present moment it is very unlikely, highly unlikely, that your situation is dangerous or critical in this moment. If it is dangerous or critical, of course you take action. You have to do something to get out of this immediate challenge. But it's highly unlikely that in this moment there is immediate danger or your situation is critical right now. So it's first step then is coming into this moment and realizing, okay, you become aware of sense perceptions. Then you become aware of thoughts. It may take a little while for some people who are deeply identified with the stream of thinking. It may take them, it may not even be very easy at first to become aware of sense perceptions, which is part of being present. Why is it not easy for many people to become aware of sense perceptions? Because their entire consciousness is continuously being absorbed by the conditioned mind, and so their entire attention is in the thought processes. So their entire attention is consumed by unconscious thought processes, and so they go. And if somebody says to them, become aware of your surroundings, it may not be easy at first for people who are deeply, deeply trapped in fearful thinking, particularly, to even liberate some of their attention, so to speak, to take some of your attention away from thinking and to direct it towards sensory perception. So you may find, particularly when you find yourself in a challenging situation, when the mind has become very reactive and is thinking, what am I going to do now? What's going to happen to me? I need to do something, but I don't know what. And all kinds of scenarios. So your mind your attention is completely taken up by the unconscious thought processes. And if then I say, or whoever it is says, become aware of your sense perceptions, you may find there is an almost magnetic pull by your mind. It wants to continue thinking, and it has a certain, I sometimes call it, a certain gravitational pull. There's a gravitational pull like a magnet, and you cannot free even a small part of your conscious attention and give it to sense perception. And sometimes you have the mind may even be creating a thought that tells you why you cannot give attention to sense perception, and that thought might tell you, what's the point? I've got other problems now. I have to think about my life. I can't. This is completely irrelevant. I have to solve the big problem of me, my life situation. I have to think about this. Don't tell me about become aware of my surroundings or sense perception. It's pointless. So that the gravitational pull of the conditioned mind is there, and it might even find some kind of justification to prevent you from taking attention, even some attention, away from unconscious thinking. But once you discover that, you say, okay, you don't have to believe in every thought that arises in your mind. You don't have to believe every thought. Okay, even that little realization, I don't have to believe in every thought that comes into my mind, is already the beginning of a liberation from your mind. Oh, I don't have to believe in every thought. Interesting. Because that already implies that there's at least a minimum of awareness. It's not just the thought processes. When you realize that you don't have to believe every thought in your mind, then that already implies that there's some awareness there because it's only from awareness you can be aware of a thought. This is a very subtle thing. It's fundamental to understand this because your mind, your consciousness has another dimension. There's a dimension of consciousness in you that you can call awareness or presence. And most people still don't know that, and millions on our planet still are so identified with the mind they have almost no awareness
Some awareness occasionally arises, but they don't recognize it. In other words, there may be occasional moments when the mind subsides briefly. And that's a little bit of a liberation, but they don't know, they don't recognize that, and immediately the mind starts up again. So you become aware of your thought processes. And then you realize how much of your thinking is directed towards the future, how much it is creating a scenario that is fearful. And you realize the connection between what your mind is saying, the voice in the head, that says, it's partly a voice in the head that thinks about. It could also be a visual images that arise to accompany the voice in the head. There are visual images that arise. And when these visual images arise, then, for example, you see yourself suddenly as a homeless person sitting on a bench. Oh my God. You see yourself living in your car. Oh my God. And fear arises. But the thing is, if you were actually living in your car for a while, as some people are, and if you became present in that moment, it wouldn't be that bad. There were times, occasionally somebody once gave me an old car. That was the first car I ever had. That was shortly after I spent a period of homelessness. And there were sometimes nights when I spent in that old car, and I enjoyed it tremendously. It was just almost romantic to be in this little bubble. This is just a little anecdote. What this is pointing to is really the present moment is never quite as bad as the mental projection of some future bad moment. And in the mental projection of some future bad moment, there's nothing you can do about it. But if there's something in the present moment, you can meet whatever arises with the power of your conscious presence. This is what is. And you come into this moment and become aware of this moment and realize in this moment there is no problem as such. That's a very strange realization. It's not a denial. It takes you to a deeper level, a deeper consciousness, and that is presence or awareness. So you realize coming into this moment, you've taken some attention out of your thinking mind, and some attention now goes into sense perceptions. This is a very important part of becoming present. And in this moment, sense perception means you look around and you listen, whatever noise may be there, and not just, you really give attention to whatever it is you're looking at or listening to. You come to your senses. If you come to your senses, look at the sky, trees. Anything natural is the best thing to look at if you can, but it could be anything. So you come to your senses means there's less mind activity, more presence. And then you become aware that the mind activity that you have been engaged in is ultimately not helpful. That the mind activity itself, the narrative, these unconscious scenarios that the mind created, they are not helpful. You become aware that worrying is not helpful. And worrying, which is thinking in circles, thinking the same things in the same lines again without any possibility of taking action. Right now, you're just, it's not only not helpful, it's actually destructive. And when you become aware of that, you can more and more let go of unhelpful mind activity and replace it with aware presence in the now.
Welcome to the second part of this special video series on Conscious Manifestation 2020. In this second part, Eckhart Tolle addresses how once we've developed a level of presence and awareness of thoughts and emotions, how do we work with anxiety or fear that keeps erupting, that we keep feeling in our felt experience? Here's part 2 of Conscious Manifestation 2020 with Eckhart Tolle.
Now, what about the fear? What about the anxiety? The anxiety that has been in you. For many people, it's in the background most of their lives, some fear, some anxiety. And when they're being challenged, as now, the anxiety that is a kind of background, distant background noise for some people is almost always there, or sometimes obscured, but then it's there again, that suddenly becomes very pronounced, this anxiety in the face of a challenge, the anxiety that had already been there in the background, the fear, that now comes out fully, and you are in the grip of it. And now you become aware of the link between your thought processes and your emotions. And you realize that your unconscious thought process, such as worry, actually fuel the emotion that we call fear or anxiety continuously. So a vicious circle arises, and then the emotion that you feel, which you feel it, tend to feel it in your stomach, in this area here, you feel it, a contraction, almost a painful thing dwelling in your stomach or solar plexus area. But it can affect the whole body. The whole body can be tense. It interferes with the harmonious functioning of your body. So this anxiety lowers your immune system on the physical level. Even mainstream medicine recognizes the fact that what they call stress, which stress is mostly fear and anxiety, makes you much more lowers your immune system, and you're much more susceptible to illness. It doesn't mean if you're not anxious, you will never catch an illness, but you're much more susceptible to being sick when you are in an almost continuous state of stress or anxiety. So then the fear, of course, rises up back into your mind and creates more emotionally charged fearful thinking, which is not just fearful thinking, it's now emotionally charged fearful thinking. And that creates even more of that emotion. This is why it's called a vicious circle. The fearful thinking feeds the fearful emotion with energy. One could say the fearful thinking vibrates at the same frequency as the fearful emotion. So it is food that the emotion loves. So it wants more of it. Once you're under the grip of worrying, anxious thinking, you don't want to stop. Well, you might want to stop, but you're not even there when you're completely identified. It does not want to stop. So you are trapped in this fearful, vicious circle of emotion, fearful thinking, creating the emotion of fear, and the emotion of fear rising back up into your mind and creating a emotionally charged fearful thinking. And when you are in that state, you cannot think clearly. Whatever thought that arises, what do I have to do now? What can I do now? It's very unlikely that you will have a creative and a useful thought. Whatever your action you take on the basis of fearful thinking is likely to be not wise, not effective, and probably wrong, and leads to more suffering. In whatever way you interpret the world through the veil of fearful thinking, in whatever way you interpret the world when you're in the grip of fearful thinking, is going to be a complete misinterpretation. But to you, when you identify with it, it's the reality. So the first thing is to become aware of thoughts and emotions. And then, that means the awareness has arisen, it's there. Then once you recognize the futility and destructive nature of certain types of thinking, you're able to increasingly let go of it and replace it, not immediately necessarily with positive thoughts, but it's better to, because you still have the negative emotion there. So if you immediately replace the unconscious fearful thinking with positive thoughts, there's a conflict between the emotion that is still there, which is the fear, and the thoughts that are floating on top there. And you will feel that there's something not right, because the emotion says you're in a critical state, and your mind has a thought that all is well, life is good, I'm going to be abundant. It's unlikely that this will be effective. So again, realize what kind of thoughts go through your mind, recognize the futility and destructive nature of these types of thought, and then replace these thoughts not immediately with positive thoughts, but with awareness. Replace, instead of engaged in negative thinking, be more present as much as you can, be more in the present moment, because after all, that's all there ever is. The mind doesn't seem to know that. All there ever is the present moment. There's nothing else ever in your life, so you might as well give it some attention. You might as well make it the focus of your life, because it unfolds in this now moment, everything. Future never comes. It's always now. When the future comes, it's the now. When the past happened, it was the now. When you remember the past, you remember it now. When you think about future, you think about it now. There is only now, so you might as well give it your fullest attention, make it the focal point of your life, and then see what you can do with the so-called future. But first you need to come into a relationship with the now that is helpful, sane, and that is friendly. Become friendly with them. When you enter the now, you see the now is not really that, is not a threatening place most of the time, except when there's an emergency happening, then you have to do something, an immediate life-threatening or whatever it is. But the now is actually a much more benign place than the mind would be able to recognize. But you need to have your awareness there. You need to be aware. You need to be present in the now in order to recognize that the now is can actually be your friend, and is not your enemy. The now is your friend. You become friendly with the present moment, and that's however. So you begin to cut the link between your thought processes and the emotion, because you let go of these fearful thoughts. You recognize their futility. Instead, you're much more present. Thoughts will occasionally still come in, and then you recognize them. Let go. Be more present. However, in that presence, the emotion of fear may not and probably will not immediately disappear, because it's been there for a long time. So even if you no longer fuel the emotion with your thinking, you become present, and you may notice, yes, I'm more aware of sense perceptions, the aliveness of this moment. You can see perhaps beauty in things where the things that you didn't even give any attention to before. However, you can also still feel this anxiety or fear living in you, still there. Even when you're no longer feeding it with your thoughts, you can still feel it. There it is. And that becomes part of your experience of the present moment, that anxiety. Now, what do you do with it? The normal tendency would be to say, I want to get rid of this. I shouldn't be feeling this. I don't want to feel this. And some people just cannot tolerate the anxiety, so they might go to their doctor and say, please do something about this anxiety. The doctor will then give you a prescription. In some extreme cases, those things may be temporarily helpful in some extreme cases. But a lot of the time, you would have missed an opportunity, and that is the opportunity of evolving through facing pain or suffering. If you face the emotional pain that you feel, that it's anxiety or fear, and not try to run away from it, or say, I can't become so uncomfortable. Being in your own skin can become so unpleasant and uncomfortable that you just want to run away, or say, please give me something so that I don't have to feel this anymore. But actually, it doesn't help to want to get rid of it. It just creates another layer of anxiety or problems on top of the emotion. Now, I suggest, as an alternative approach, is to make the emotion that you feel that still lives in you part of your experience of the present moment, and accept it in the way you accept the totality of the present moment. And that's a new way of living, a very powerful way of living, a very powerful way of connecting with a deeper level of consciousness in you, of finding enormous power that dwells in you, if you can accept the present moment as it is, internally, externally, and internally. So it's not going to kill you. The anxiety is there, but it's not going to kill you. It might kill you if you react to it and create further anxiety. And you then allow the anxiety to be there as it is completely. It's almost like saying, it sounds a little strange, it's almost like saying, I don't mind being anxious. Sounds very paradoxical. But it's a very interesting experiment you can conduct. Any form of unhappiness, of course, some unhappiness is telling you that something is wrong in your life. It's a different story. But habitual unhappiness that arises in you, no matter where you go and what you do, unhappiness arises in you. No matter where you go and what you do, fear and anxiety are there. And this applies to countless humans on the planet. Now, as an experiment, as I said, what happens when they say, I don't mind being unhappy, I don't mind being anxious? But of course, you're not fueling the anxiety with your thinking, you're aware of your anxiety. So you've reached that step where you're no longer giving it further fuel or food, and you're becoming aware of the anxiety, and then you become what there is and as you place your attention on it, which is part of the attention that's in the present moment, you become aware that it's actually, there's very intense energy in that fear. Almost a burning energy in that fear. But the energy is not a flowing energy, it's trapped energy. It's like being in like a boiling kettle, you're holding the lid down. The energy is trapped, but there is enormous life energy in that fear. And if you can completely accept your fear at this moment, without feeding it any longer with your thinking, just being aware of it, that's what it is, you may find